Hey, very good afternoon to everyone. Welcome to this session on promoting green trade and facilitating a just transition in Asia, the role of inclusive trade policies. My name is Bruno Carrasco. I am the Director General of the Climate Change and Sustainable Development Department at the Asian Development Bank, and I'm also very pleased to moderate this afternoon's session. We have a great set of presenters, and I will introduce them shortly. I wanted to begin by saying that it is after lunch, it is a Friday afternoon, and the weather is beautiful. So I am sure you will not regret being here with the fantastic presenters that we have today. You made the right decision. Okay, so for those of you who are here, you all know the World Trade Organization. I think most of you know the Asian Development Bank. For those few who do not, we are, of course, a multilateral development bank for Asia and the Pacific. We were established in 1966. We are owned by 68 members, 49 of which are from Asia and the Pacific. We have operations that on average come out to about $20 billion per annum, and with co-financing and trust funds, another $11 billion in terms of largely loans, equity, grants, and some guarantees. Our remit is very important, and that is to achieve a prosperous, inclusive, resilient, and sustainable Asia in the Pacific, while, of course, not forgetting to sustain our efforts to eradicate poverty, including extreme poverty. I would like to just share a few words to begin with to set the context. Let me begin by saying that Asia Pacific, as all of you know, has benefited tremendously from the trade. Asia Pacific economies are largely classified as outward-looking, open, competitive economies. Trade, of course, has been extremely important as a driver of growth in the region and the poverty reduction agenda. Having said that, there are also some downsides to growth and trade. And I would like to highlight that there has been, of course, a significant cost to the environment and to nature, and we need to address this. It is abundantly clear that Asia cannot stay on this trajectory. To do so would not only jeopardize sustainability, but also undermine inclusiveness, given the disproportionate impact of climate change on vulnerable groups and communities. So against this backdrop, I just wanted to share three sets of figures. The first one is that exports across Asia and the Pacific are estimated to account to slightly over 1/4 of Asia Pacific's production-based carbon emissions. The second point I wanted to make is that in Asia Pacific, carbon dioxide emissions from exports have nearly tripled from 1995 to 2019. And then the third set of statistics is that more broadly, Asia and the Pacific account for slightly over 1/2 of greenhouse gas global shares. So that puts into context what our president often says, that the battle against the climate change will be won or lost in Asia and the Pacific. One other point to make is that disproportionately Asia Pacific and the Pacific is very much vulnerable to climate augmented natural disasters. I've spent my last 30 years in the Philippines. We used to have about 4 to 5 typhoons a year. Now we're generally having about 20 of them, some of them very, very destructive. So that's just an example. Last year's tragic floods in Pakistan really made it clear for everyone that we cannot leave this agenda aside. We need to be addressing climate change as part of the sustainable development objectives. Let me just quickly move on to say that against this backdrop, our session will explore how trade and trade policies can be leveraged to support and promote sustainable, inclusive economic growth in Asia. Central to discussions, we have the following 3 sets of questions. First, what are the major issues related to trade and climate changes? climate change, excuse me. Second, how can trade and trade policy actively contribute to addressing climate change, mitigation and adaptation in Asia? And then third, how can multilateral institutions like World Trade Organization, the Asian Development Bank, join forces and advance the green trade in their developing member countries? So that's what we have before us. Just very quickly, laying out some rules. We have 4 distinguished panelists today that I will introduce shortly. We have approximately an hour and 5 minutes to cover a lot of material, so I will kindly ask the panelists if they can keep to time. We have 3 rounds that we will try to meet. The first one is setting the stage. The second one is a focus on Asia. And then the third is fostering cooperation and collaboration in Asia and the Pacific. We will hopefully leave the last 10 to 15 minutes for questions from the participants. So please be ready if there are any things that you'd like to ask us. We will ask you to come in and contribute to the discussions. So I've done my part. Now I would like to move on to the questions. So I'm going to start the first round of questions, and my first question under the setting the stage will go to Director Ek-Ho Lim. You have probably seen him every day on various panels and presentations. He's clearly a workaholic, and he has a lot more stamina than most of us. So thank you very much, Ek-Ho, for joining. Let me just briefly, for the few of you who may not know Ek-Ho, he's the Director of Trade and Environment Division at the World Trade Organization and leads its work in environmental sustainability, climate change, and trade. So he has a very important role at that. And of course, the agreement on technical barriers to trade. His leadership has strengthened partnerships with the United Nations and ushered the establishment of World Trade Organization's Trade and Environment Week. There will also be a trade day now at the forthcoming COP, and we look forward to being able to continue the discussions there. So, Ek-Ho, let me begin with a question, which is, what are the main issues that you see at the WTO related to trade and environment? So the interconnection between trade and environment, and how has the global debate on these issues evolved over time? Are we seeing a shift in mood, a shift in understanding? So over to you, Ek-Ho. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Bruno. Yes, I think people have probably heard me say the same things repeatedly, so I'll try to be a bit more original in this session. I mean, a short answer to what you're saying about the main issues at the WTO related to trade and environment would be, it's happening all around you in this public forum. I mean, that would be my quick short answer would be, just take a look at the public forum program, and that would immediately give you a snapshot of all the issues related to trade and environment. It's quite bewildering. It's rather complex. It's somewhat multifaceted. And it also raises questions about, are these issues that WTO can handle? I mean, I to put it very succinctly. And I think that is what the debate has evolved into. And it's been a long discussion. I mean, it didn't begin 5 years ago. I mean, trade and environment was one of the key issues even back at the Uruguay round, and then leading up to the formation of the Committee of the Trade and Environment and so forth. It's also there in the preamble of the WTO agreement, but most people probably don't read the preamble, or if they do read it, they think it's only a preamble. But in the preamble, it already sets it out kind of quite clearly, actually. It's about raising living standards on the one hand, but on the other hand, also ensuring the sustainable development and also ensuring that we protect the environment whilst we optimize the use of the world's resources. So that relationship was, I think, struck quite clearly in the preamble of the WTO agreement. But the challenge is, how do you go from a preambular language to actually getting this in a sense, become part of the DNA of the WTO. It's not so easy, and it's for good reason, because WTO is a very specialist organization dealing with trade, and we have trade agreements on every single part of trade. But what I've seen in the last few years is that the need to have a better understanding, one, and then if you can go beyond understanding, to deal with concerns, and then to be even more than that, to find opportunities out of these concerns by which trade can actually promote better environmental outcomes, and at the same time improve the way we trade, has become in essence the agenda today at the WTO. How is this agenda proceeding, and where is it proceeding in? Again, I can't give you a single snapshot answer, because it's a bit like the public forum, but more organized than that, if I can be cheeky. You have the formal Committee on Trade and Environment. That's the premier body for this discussion. But then you also have new initiatives from the members, not the full membership, but a good number of members behind initiatives such as the structured discussions on trade and environmental sustainability, very path-breaking, I would say, discussion on dialogue on plastics pollution, and then another one on fossil fuel subsidy reform. But as these issues are being taken up in these bodies, you also have discussions on climate change and environment happening in other parts of the WTO. And to try to shrink it a bit more, what are the discussions about? I mean, there is always a traditional WTO perspective, is how do we reduce the trade impact of an environmental measure? And is this environmental measure in keeping with WTO principles and so forth, agreements and all that, But there's also another part which is about how can trade policy play a more positive role in getting towards environmental outcomes. And then the best case at the end would be, how do we deal with a triple win situation of ensuring that developing countries continue to be able to use trade as a tool for development, sustainable development. You mentioned Asia as being one of the clear-cut regions that have benefited, but other regions also need to benefit. But at the same time, we also have to deal with, I was told in the last session, stop using the word climate change, it should be climate crisis. And I think the person probably was very right. It is a climate crisis. How do we deal with it? And the last is less fragmentation in the policy responses by country. So let me stop there and pass the floor back to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Eiko, for those sharing those views. Complex, multifaceted, complex are some of the. Sorry.
Yes. Sorry.
Okay. So definitely, from what we're seeing at this public forum, there is a very important debate going on, and we see that we're in the good hands of Eiko in driving this and having further discussions as we take this forward. I would like now to move to the second presenter, and I'd like to introduce Her Excellency Ambassador Pitfield. Let me just introduce her briefly. So Ambassador Pimchanuk Vongkorpon Pitfield has served as the ambassador and permanent representative of Thailand at the WTO and at the World Intellectual Property Organization in Geneva since March of 2021. She is a seasoned multilateral, regional, and bilateral trade negotiator for her country with an expertise spanning services, investment, e-commerce, environment, and labor. Ambassador Pitfield, Thailand has been a country that has benefited very strongly from a very open export characterization of its economy, tremendous progress in terms of agribusiness, car manufacturing, and many others. Can you share how Thailand has engaged in the trade and environment debate in the World Trade Organization, and what are your priorities in this area? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And I have put my stopwatch on, so I won't exceed 5 minutes at least. And don't be alarmed that I have put up the screen, because it's not for my presentation. I can always speak without any reading. But I want to tell the stories instead of talking about negotiating issues and principles, so on and so forth. You know, this is the last day. I'm sure you have heard about that in so many forums. What I want to share is the real examples of real experience that Thailand as a country in Asia has been doing in terms of transitioning to green economy. So to answer your question, Bruno, Thailand has been active at WTO and CT since its inception. I was here since 1992 doing the two dispute settlement cases, which were very important to start off the debate on trade and environment, which was the tuna dolphin and the shrimp turtle. I was personally involved with those two cases. And so I was very well aware of how important the relation on this issue could be, but it's not only me, it's Thailand as well. Needless to say, we were directly involved and very interested in those two cases because shrimp and tuna were and still are our main exporting items. And I must say that since the beginning, we are motivated mostly by mercantilist interests. You know, we want to keep our export, that kind of stuff. But since then, we also have seen how important and how interrelated trade and environment and climate crisis, okay, sorry, could be. I would say that in the beginning, maybe the perception of Thailand's government and private sector was more a little bit ambivalent and defensive. You know, we want to keep our export, our trade going on. We understand the importance of environment, but we are developing countries. We need some help. We need transition period. We need technology, that kind of stuff. But I think since 1992, 93 until now, even Thailand's perception and experiences have changed. I would say quite dramatically for me, who has been following this issue for many years. Now we have embraced more how important that trade and environment and sustainability can go together, and we have recognized that as an important trading country, we have a role to play as other in Asia Pacific. I think I want to highlight the fact that there are several things that have pushed Thailand into greater recognition and embracing the importance of trade, environment development, and sustainability. It's not only that our private sector now see more opportunities and economic potentials, but our young people, young generation has been enthusiastic, and also the public in Thailand has been very interested in. This is a case which was very poignant in my country. About 4 years ago, there was a dugong. I'm not sure you are familiar with the dugong. The dugong was a mammal that lives nearby the shore, and we believe that dugong is what many people call the mermaid. The mermaid. This is a real mermaid. She doesn't look like Ariel, you know, no long hair, golden hair and stuff. But these are the real thing. Dugong is a very endangered species in Thailand. The first endangered species, a marine mammal that we have registered. 4 years ago, there was a baby dugong about 4 months. I have to keep up my time. That was rescued, and she was like I think she was one of the superstar in internet and YouTube. Many people followed her closely because she was her parents. She couldn't find her parents. She was raised by humans. We all call her our little angel, and she was with us for 111 days. Finally, she died, and when she was dissected, and we found that she died because of plastic. You know, you can understand, she broke our heart in the nation that, you know, the danger of plastic in the sea is so poignant and so important. So many younger people have been interested. I'm running out of time in half second. I want to go to answer that. From that on, it's like it's sparking a lot of interest. In Thailand, we have come up with the policy that no plastic bag, you know, no plastic bag at all. You go to supermarket, we have to do it like Micro here. You have to get your own bag, or you have to buy some bag. But also other issues that we have been interested in, apart from plastic, which is pollution. In the WTO, I would say our priorities are on the rule making, because this is a trade organization. We want to ensure that trade rules will not impede our environmental protection, but at the same time be supportive of our trade and economic efforts. So if we want to go dive deeper, I think for Thailand, there are other sub-issues as well that are key to us. I'm not going to talk about the issue in the negotiation, but broadly, biodiversity, for example, is of interest of Thailand. We are also looking at how environmental standards and related measures, such as eco-labeling, will become supportive rather than inhibitive to our efforts. Food security issue is another important issue for us related to climate change. And also, food have two sides, livelihood, but also GHG, the greenhouse gas emissions. So it's very important. We are also interested in SMEs adaptation, investment, incentive, rules that are relevant to investment, access to technology. And last but not least that I want to mention now is the ongoing discussion on updating trade rules. So it would not it would be compatible with the sustainability goal. So we have come, not so much, decades ago, we have come a long way to finally have a dugong walking our interests and real support from the public on environment. And now is the task at the WTO to make sure that the interests of developing countries will continue. So my first round, I will stop there. I'm sorry to be taking too long.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. A very compelling image to show how Thailand recognizes the values of nature, biodiversity, and how trade plays a very important role in moving the needle in these areas to address the climate crisis and others. Let me now turn to Dr. Deborah Elms. Let me begin by saying a short introduction. Deborah is the Executive Director and founder of the Asian Trade Center, ATC, a Singaporean-based consultancy that works with governments and corporations to design better trade policies and agreements. She also holds prominent positions as president of the Asia Business Trade Association, ABTA, board director of the Asian Trade Center Foundation, ATCF, and board member of the UN's Trade and Investment Negotiation Advisor, TINA, at UNESCO. Deborah, my question to you is, are there emerging innovative approaches or best practices that could strengthen the impact and implementation of environmental or climate-related provisions in trade agreements? Thank you.
The answer is yes. So that's the short answer. Let me give you the slightly longer answer. So I think one of the things that I find fascinating in Asia, certainly, is the number of small businesses that are built from the beginning around sustainability and the environment. They're designed for whatever it is that they're making, whatever their services are. They start from the premise that it's important to support better climate outcomes. But as an added bonus for many of these small firms, there's also an economic reason to do so. If you're small, you need to have some way to differentiate yourself from someone else. One way to do so is to make environmentally friendly goods and services. And so I think the first point to note is that we have a lot of small businesses across Asia that are already in climate-friendly goods and services. And so then what I think we should be trying to do is say, how do we reduce the barriers or the obstacles that they face to getting their goods and services in front of customers and to be part of supply chains around all kinds of things. I mean, it could be, for example, one of the companies that we mentor makes bamboo slippers for hotels so that all of these hotels has a recyclable slipper rather than just throwing out slippers every time you change guests. Another one, we have a lot of companies that work on innovative packaging. We have a great company that works out of Indonesia that makes shampoo and soap and things. And it comes, I should have brought it with me, but it's an amazing little woven basket, which is how the thing is packaged, and then everything is made into hard versions of like shampoo so that it can be much more easily transported. You're not moving water, you're just moving the shampoo. These are the kinds of innovations that I think are important. So what is it that small businesses then need in order to do a better job? Or what are some of the obstacles that they face? Or what are some of the areas that especially the WTO and ADB and others could really support that would make a difference to small businesses? The first and the most important thing is that small businesses are digital. So if we do not have digital rules and crucially consistent digital rules across the widest possible area, it is very hard for small businesses to find customers, to find suppliers, to become part of a supply chain themselves, et cetera. So digital rules is not just a nice to have. It's not just a when 25 years from now we get around to it in the WTO that we finally finish the JSI, but you need it yesterday. So digital rules are critical and they need to be as expansive as possible and designed with small businesses at the outset. So I think digital makes a huge difference. We need to remember an old agenda that somehow is not sexy, but is absolutely critical to small businesses around trade facilitation. If you're a small business and you're trying to move environmentally friendly shampoo, the last thing you need are any obstacles at customs. So you need to be able, as an example, to have de minimis levels. I know this is a very toxic word in much of the trade world community, but I will tell you, if you're trying to move a thing of shampoo, de minimis makes a big difference to you. You need to have a level below which you don't have to deal with customs, taxes, tariffs, customs paperwork, et cetera. And that level needs to be consistent across multiple markets, because that makes a big difference for you in the speed with which you can actually get your products to market. So trade facilitation, although it sounds unsexy, is absolutely vital to small businesses who are making environmentally friendly goods. We also forget all the time, and I think this might warm Iko's heart given his previous task, we forget all the time the importance of services for small businesses. Many of the smallest firms are actually in services sectors. And many of them are providing environmentally friendly services of all kinds and things that you might not think of as environmental services that are related to things like, the development of shampoo. So it's important to think very hard about how do we encourage small businesses who are in the services sector to limit the licensing, the qualification, the obstacles that prevent them from delivering their services. And of course, it ties to digital, be able to deliver those online and digitally. Because without that, then they can't possibly give you the sort of interesting climate-friendly services that I think are super important. We also need to do a generally better job of supporting environmental goods and services trade. So I just came from a panel that was fascinating. It was about the obstacles around HS codes and classification issues around environmental goods. How do we know? So let's think about my company that makes the bamboo slippers. Slippers are slippers. Right? There's no classification for recyclable bamboo slippers. It doesn't exist. So how do they get themselves classified in a way that allows their products to move across borders with a benefit, as opposed to being caught with every other not environmentally friendly hotel slipper? So trying to think harder about what do we need to do on a practical level to support the trade in environmentally friendly goods and then ultimately services, I think is important. And then the last thing I'm just going to mention before I start this one is that is a sort of, in my view, a happy piece of news about small businesses that I don't think we talk about enough. We often talk about the digital divide, which is real. So we need to have connectivity, of course, for small businesses. I know that's not something that the WTO specifically does, but it's certainly something that the ADB is concerned about. But the good news, in my view, about digital skills is that for a lot of small businesses, the barriers to developing digital skills is really quite small these days. You don't need an engineering degree. You don't need to code. You just need to have a phone and access to the internet. And guess what? You can take lovely photos of your product and get it online. There's no website. There's no complicated coding, et cetera. So I think the happy news for me, again, is that while digital skills matter, I'm not saying that they're non-existent, but I don't think that the barrier is as high as people seem to think. And when working with especially small, tiny businesses across Asia, even in the most remote places, assuming that they have an internet connection that is stable, Many of them have already the digital skills that they need in order to compete. And I think so that's sort of a happy news. I don't think we have to spend quite as much time and effort as people originally imagined around this. So instead, I'd rather have us focus on other issues like, again, digital rules in general, supporting ESG products, we're thinking about services, and all of it from the perspective of how do we facilitate and encourage small businesses, particularly small businesses in this case in the circular economy, to be a much bigger part of the future going forward. So let me stop there. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you so much for those comments, Deborah. So we've gone from the dugong to the bamboo slippers.
I will have a product.
There may be something else in that magic box. But no, I wanted to thank you for those points. So unequivocal, yes, there are innovative approaches, but we need to recognize some of those challenges, as Deborah has mentioned. We at ADB have spent quite a bit of effort on the trade facilitation that you mentioned. We feel that there are a lot of gains to be able to streamline that work. And so pleased to note that these are important challenges that still can be improved upon. So from there, let's move to round two, which will be more of a focus on Asia. So we've set the context. There's been some fabulous replies to some of the challenges that we face. I'm going to now introduce my colleague, Sin Young Park. Sin Young is the Director of the Regional Cooperation and Integration and Trade Divisions in the Climate Change and Sustainable Development Department, where she leads a team of regional cooperation integration experts and provides guidance in the design and implementation of RCI and trade projects. Sin Young, let me turn to you with the following question. How do you see the role of trade in climate change mitigation and adaptation in Asia? And the follow-up question is, what are the main opportunities and challenges facing Asia in using trade policies to facilitate a shift towards a low carbon economy? Over to you. Thanks.
Thank you, Bruno. I wish I had a little more like a colorful examples. Well, I think everyone sort of like recognize the importance of trade in driving the industrialization and growth in especially developing countries in the region. From like a bit broader sort of like the picture. In fact, trade accounts for about 60% of the world GDP. Asia exports constitute the 40% of total global GDP. We all know that Asia has been the largest, the beneficiary of open trade and investment that has brought down significantly the poverty across the countries and helped us achieve substantial the inclusive growth in the region. So this seems that the trade does have a strong potential in driving the really sustainable inclusive growth in the region. But at the same time, we've seen that the trade and trade-related transportation have been major also the contributor to global carbon emission annually. We have seen about like 1/3 of the global carbon emission coming from trade and trade-related activities, and we all know that how much the Asia is actually contributing to the global trade scene. That means that the Asia's trade is also a major player in global carbon emission. So if we do not incorporate the trade and the trade policy as an integral part of global climate actions, we will not be able to achieve that effective climate mitigation and then adaptation. Bruno already mentioned earlier, like the battle against the climate change will start and end in Asia. And I say the strongest armory we have to fight climate change is, in fact, trade in the region. Facilitating the trade in environmental goods and services can help bring down the cost of adapting green technologies in the region. We've seen a lot of good examples, as already mentioned by Deborah about the slippers and there are many aside from these maybe the SME efforts, they're like a clean and renewable energy goods also highly critical to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions. They encourage the low carbon production techniques, and then they can also help relocate the resources towards the activities with the low carbon intensities. So Asia's trade in, but then Asia's trade in the environmental goods is quite significant. It's also driven largely by the renewable energy and also by the countries, large countries like China. We have about 40% of the global volume produced and then traded by Asian economies. Nevertheless, if we look at the environmental services, it lags substantially behind. It's accounting only 2% of the global total. So there is a really large room to develop this industrial potential and the climate goal potential from the environmental services. We need to really take leverage of the better access and more affordable access to green finance and then technology to support Asian businesses. There is a great opportunity to improve resource opportunities by helping the trade finance and trade facilitation while reducing the environmental footprint from the Asian businesses. We need to combine regulations, standards, and a certification with policy incentives to make it more effective in reducing pollution and accelerate the needed switch to less polluting the production process. There are a number of ways. Of course, we have to make better use of the trade agreements. There are a number of environmental the provisions in preferential trade agreements. We've seen a tremendous growth actually in the pickup of environmental provisions in trade agreements. It started, meager like 2 provisions per agreement in 1990, but we now see nearly 90 provisions in 2018, but it's not enough. It's important to note that trade can be a powerful tool, especially trade agreement can be a powerful tool that can enforce the domestic reforms and then policies to ensure that the trade can be leveraged to achieve our climate goals. Now, let me stop here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sin Young. The importance of green finance and technology, policy reforms, and opportunities provided by trade agreements. Very, very important indeed. And we are aspiring to be more and more involved in many of these areas as we develop our regional cooperation and trade work in the bank. Very good. I'm now going to turn to Ambassador Pitfield. So could you share in this case some examples of successful initiatives adopted in your country, in Thailand, to advance the green trade?
Yes.
Thank you.
May I have the screen, please? I have more colorful examples. And I'm going to go beyond from the dugong to others. First of all, I think I want to give an example of the successful campaign that was actually the result of the death of our beloved dugong, which is the government issued countrywide ban of use of plastic bag in supermarket. It was very successful, but it has also shown that even though with good environmental perspective, it's not easy. It has cost. So I will share this later. But that is one successful campaign that I want to share with you, that people can do it, but there are costs and the PPP, polluters pay principle. It is good principle, but in actual implementation, it's quite difficult. But I also would like to share a few other examples, like Deborah was talking about the sandals. In Thailand, we have many cases that are out of our SMEs and small holding farmers. This is a showcases that the Ministry of Commerce is supporting. I don't know, it's not moving. Sorry. Oh, here I have to point it to him, not to here. Sorry. So, but what I want to share, and I don't have time to go through all of these. These are the SMEs, which I entirely share Deborah's, that SMEs is and are an important part of every country to integrate and to transition into green economy. In Asia, not only we are the biggest trader and great emission gas emitters, but we also have between 95 to 99% of our business are SME. So we have to help them. But there are many things that can be done. It's not only product development, like I'm showing here, but it's also what I found interesting is that the community can also become green. You know, it's not only the individual operators, but the community, the farmers, the cooperative that can embrace and adopt this kind of transition. For the SME, this is an example of, you see the little dog there, you know, I'm very fond of animal. This is a case where we do circular economy. We use vegetable waste to and mix it with insects and make it pet food. I'm sorry, it sounds a bit gross, isn't it? But that is how we try to reduce food waste. But there are many other things that we are doing. I will talk about circular economy when I come to the bigger examples. But there are many things here that, you know, if you have time and you're interested, we will be happy to share in detail. I can move forward from Laika? Oops. Not moving. Sorry. Okay, go ahead. I don't have time to explain all of these, but these are either SMEs or farmers or community that have become green. What they will have is they have support from the ministry. Can we go to the last example of Midpon, please? Yeah, go. Yeah, all of these products are green. Yeah, many are done by farmers. Yeah. Okay, I don't have the time to show. Yeah, here, this is the biggest example because I'm coming from the smaller one. Now, this is the biggest sugar producer in Thailand, and I have seen their real circular economy put in principle. I went to visit their factory before I came to Switzerland. And again, my point is it can be done, but it's not easy. And it has cost. Midpon is the largest sugar producer. So they have a lot of leftover. You know, they have the molasses, they have the what is left over from the cane. They try to do this. Yeah, then you go to a second page and another one. Yeah. They talk to me that research and development in circular economy takes really time. You know, they have done it more than 10 years before they can really completely have no waste in their factory, you know, but it costs a lot of money. They don't have R&D. They don't have a lot of expertise. Everything is like done by testing like over again and again. So even the largest producer in Thailand have this problem. I would want to summarize the challenges that I have here when negotiating the trade and environment. First, of course, I agree we have to have SMEs interest in mind, how to help them. But I don't have to, you know, Deborah also already talked about that. What I want to mention is that larger or smaller operators in developing countries, we need access to finance. We need access to investment, you know. We also need access to technology, to information, and not least of all, we need access to market. Why? Because if you have to shoulder the cost, you have to find a way to do R&D, but you don't have the market, you cannot sell your products. Where are the incentives? So I think, pardon me for being a little, you know, trade motivated, but this is what we do. If you want to incentivize or persuade entrepreneurs to embrace the green, you have to find a market for them. You know, if they cannot sell organic product, they don't want to do it. It's very costly. So my final point here is that large corporation in the region can also help the smaller ones. They can share know-how, they can share knowledge, and of course, like I said, they can share know-who because they know where to get the help. And I think the role of the WTO negotiations in the future, of course, we have to recognize the importance and the supportive role that we can play with sustainability, but at the same time, we have to do our job as well, which is to ensure that people also benefit from green trade, you know, and that regulatory principle or regulatory regime that would come out of the negotiation must be supportive and enabling rather than hinder the kind of efforts that are ongoing in developing countries. So I think, or I have some more, but I will stop there. If I have time, I will come back to talk about the PPP, but let's see whether there's time. Thank you.
Thank you again, Ambassador, for a very lovely presentation. The importance of MSMEs, not only for employment creation, but also for being agile, innovative, as we've seen in the case of Thailand. And again, trying to join some of the dots from what Sin Young had said earlier, the importance of access to finance, technology, and markets. And here again, trade finance is also a very important element that I'm sure at some point we will discuss. Let me now turn to Deborah. So Deborah, the question to you is, how can we engage the MSMEs and in particularly in landlocked developing countries and for women entrepreneurs to better support more inclusive and sustainable green trade?
I mean, that's a great question. I would say the first thing to remember is that there's a huge difference between micro and medium. Okay, so we often talk about what MSMEs need, and I find that we spend a lot of time on medium size or large firms. So if you're going to talk about, as an example, green financing, I have never met a small or a micro enterprise that even knows what you're talking about or would ever in a million years qualify for it. And even medium-sized firms are unlikely to get trade financing or green financing. So the reality on the ground is that what micro and small businesses, which is always in Asia, at least, the bulk of businesses, most of the jobs, not all of the growth, but a lot of it's where the jobs are, where the companies are, you need to be where they're at. So what is it that they need? Since I happen to have a room here and online, I'm hoping full of people with funding, let me tell you, what do small businesses need? They need training, and the training that they need is not the training that you often give them. Okay, so they're not interested in green financing. What do they need to know? How to run a business. How to read a profit and loss statement is not something that you're taught as an entrepreneur. If you're a small rural development person who's making slippers, you haven't got a clue how to run a business. So basic stuff on how to run a business is helpful. You need to know marketing. How to take a decent picture is actually a big thing that businesses love to have because they're not good at it. And if you're not good at it, no one will buy your products. If your products aren't packaged well, they're not buying your products. So some basic business stuff, you know, packaging. They need to know about logistics. How do they manage logistics? What are the things they need to worry about with logistics? What are the options? We often find large companies, large logistics providers will give you information, which is fabulous. I mean, they have great information. But again, it's kind of irrelevant for most small businesses because it's too bloody expensive. And you can't possibly make any money shipping through an express carrier if you're going to send out a pair of slippers. You know, it's just not going to work. So you need to have logistics that are, again, affordable for small businesses. Small businesses really struggle with legal issues, especially intellectual property rights. So some brief discussion, like, you know, you need a contract, maybe, what does it look like, so that they don't get themselves into huge troubles. Where they do need help with finance is, well, they need financing, which is different from supply chain financing or green financing. That's way too big a level. What they need is access to money, and crucially, without having to have land as the collateral, because this really stops, especially small businesses and women-owned businesses, because they rarely have collateral in land in their name. So trying to think about new ways to get money and capital into the hands of small businesses. Related to that is a problem with payments. even in the digital world. I mean, it was amazing. So we were trying to run with one of our mentorship programs. We asked everybody to send us a box of whatever it is that they made, just to see how long this would take and how difficult was it. And what a nightmare. It was 4 months for us to get boxes in from our mentees. And one of the big obstacles was we couldn't, because a lot of them are not legally registered and they don't have a legal bank account, you can't actually pay them for the box of things that they're trying to sell you. And so, payments is a major issue. So payments are an issue. But you'll notice what's not on my list. So what's not on my list, and this is slightly sad for someone who works on trade agreements all the time, not on my list is trade agreement information. Because again, that's at a level that is too complicated for small businesses. So crucially, you need to have trade agreements. You need to have a policy framework that supports small businesses. That's government's job. But businesses themselves don't have to know what the rules are necessarily. They just need to be consistent, and they need to have some sense of who do they call if they get themselves into trouble. So giving them complicated discussions about various trade agreements isn't really very helpful, because ultimately what they really want to know is, how do I get the box from here to there? What is the paperwork that I actually have to fill out? And not, do I have the right rules of origin for this? I mean, that is at a level that's just too hard for most small businesses. No jargon in there. You need to know the local language. So whatever you give them, it needs to be in local language. And you need to be aware, this is my last point, you need to be aware of local norms of behavior, which are very different. And my recent example of this, I was at a training session in Cambodia, and we were talking, in this case, we were larger firms, talking about the importance of trade agreements. And I said, you guys need to look for this information. And everyone pulled out their phones, which was, I didn't really think that we would have only phones and hardly any laptops at all. So, mobile ready, anything, government people, is terrible. So please, everything you do needs to be mobile ready. But we had a second problem in Cambodia, which didn't occur to me. The search engine that most people use in Cambodia, when you say look for information, does anyone want to guess? What is the search engine that is the first choice? You're all very quiet. Facebook. So that's where people, instead of going to Google or anything else to type in whatever you need, they go to Facebook. Well, no surprise, if you go to Facebook and you look for a trade agreement, the answer is there isn't any. Nobody puts out a trade agreement on Facebook, right? Like, who would do that? So you have to think about, like, what are the norms of behavior if you're trying to approach small businesses. Where are they? How do they correspond? How do they connect? Where do they get their information from? And if it turns out that they only use Facebook as the search engine, then you better make sure that any information that you design for small businesses in the market is actually on Facebook. Because otherwise they won't find it. And all they were like, I couldn't understand it. They were like, oh, I can't find this. And all I'm getting is these weird articles. And like, how can this be? Like, I know it's there, and I know some of it is actually mobile ready. And then I was like, oh, Facebook. Wow, that's an unusual one. I mean, kudos to Facebook, but still, like, that's hard. So the point is that you need to really know your small businesses. In order for you to actually deliver the things that they need in the format and the timing that they need it in, you actually have to talk to them. So you need to get them around and then see how they operate. And then that way you're actually meeting them where they're at, rather than you come in with some preconceived notion of what you think they need, and you deliver what you think they need. And it turns out to be one of those, like, two ships that pass in the night problems. So let me stop there. Thanks.
Thank you so much. We need to be better listeners.
So are we on Facebook, Lim?
Maybe that's the next question. All right, let me turn to Aiko. Aiko, just to complete the round two and focus on Asia, which specific issues within the trade environment debate have Asian WTO members focused on in the last few years? What's keeping them awake at night on these matters? What would be your advice to Asian WTO members in terms of further strengthening the role of trade to combat the climate crisis?
Yeah, thanks, Bruno. I think, I would like to say that Asian WTO members have been very active on trade and environment, but the reality is that they haven't been so active, apart from one issue. I mean, one issue where we have seen them sort of get together is on plastics pollution. That's on the positive side. They've been very much engaged on plastics pollution, and they have been, not all yet, but a good majority in there on the dialogue on plastics pollution, trying to do many of the things that Debbie and the ambassador has already been talking about, how to have a more sustainable plastics trade, let's put it that way, and what sorts of trade tools can be used to reduce plastics pollution. How can we get better classification? That's a big part of the discussion. Get more coherence in the different types of measures that have been taken to address plastics pollution, and also looking at substitutes. A big part of it is also about looking at what are plastic substitutes, and that's where the bamboo slipper discussion becomes very interesting. But again, as was very nicely explained by Debbie and also the ambassadors, that the trading system tools are not currently well calibrated to these types of products. So you don't have the classifications, you don't have the so-called HS codes. World Customs Organization hasn't yet developed these things. It's not WTO who develops it, it's the World Customs who does it. And so that, in a sense, is impeding at the very global level lots of actions at the local level. And I think that's the challenge, in terms of how do we link up the sort of global type of, as you correctly said, Debbie, concerns that are not going to be things that MSMEs will want to spend much time on, but has a big impact on them. What are other things that are out there that we think, at least, that the elephant in the room, I have to mention it, is of course carbon pricing, border carbon adjustment, CBAMs. These are things, of course, that not just Asian WTO members, but all WTO members are looking at very carefully, and there have already been concerns raised in different WTO bodies. There's a very active debate in the Committee on Trade and Environment. There have been discussions in the structured discussions on trade and environmental sustainability about trade-related climate measures. And then, of course, the other big piece of legislations, again, I think it was already mentioned in a sense, was a lot of new legislation going out, for instance, on deforestation. These are things that are out there. How are these things being expressed today? I can't say it's all in one particular bucket. It's across, in different parts of WTO. But these are some of the issues. But then there are also opportunities. And maybe in the things that I've mentioned that are challenges, there are also opportunities. So, and that's where I think WTO members in general, but also particularly Asian members may want to get more involved, if I can put it that way. You have to get more involved, not just on the sort of side of saying we don't like it. It's more about how do we sort of get involved in terms of finding solutions. Of course, expressing concerns is a major part of the WTO, and everybody uses the WTO for that. But expressing a concern doesn't get you far enough. You need to find a way to get to a solution, and engaging in the dialogue, coming up with proposals, ideas is one part of it. And the other one is actually, I would say, what the ambassador's done so nicely, so this is an invite to the ambassador to come back to the committee and to explain all the positive things that they're already doing, all the practices out there, all the attempts to be going towards circular economy, domestic legislation and measures that are addressing energy efficiency, for instance, or deforestation for that matter, and so forth. Because I think we don't hear enough about that. We hear a lot about, certain groups of members sharing all the things they're doing, but we don't hear that much from the Asian membership on what they are doing. And so that would help the debate and discussion as well, I think.
Sorry.
Sure.
Related to what you've said,
Mhm.
I think it's difficult, Lim and also others, to group Asia Pacific.
Yes,
And
exactly.
you have China, India, and then you have people not only different sizes but different level of development and also different interests, you know. So what would be your advice?
Well, that was
Strategy.
you took my final point, which was that it's highly diverse. You know, my very self-interested advice would be that make use of the ADB and the WTO and then the World Bank and the other sort of IOs to help customize or sort of help exactly deal with that diversity that will make it meaningful to the region and to the countries in the region, recognizing there are certain things for LDCs, certain things which are more meaningful for middle income, and then there are, of course, the higher income Asian countries. So use us to help you deal with that complexity of diversity, you know. And this is just more an anecdote because but it's a very important anecdote because everyone has been sharing dugongs and bamboo slippers and so forth. So I want to share the very humble clean cooking stove. And the clean cook stove was an issue that I discussed with the Clean Cooking Alliance some time ago. And I learned that it's not a trivial matter. It's such a big issue that something like 2.4 billion people today do not have access to clean cooking. And that is costing the world something like 2.4 trillion in damage to the climate and also to health. But 3.2 million deaths directly linked to the fact that people are still cooking mainly with wood, charcoal, and coal and kerosene. And that's a very direct trade issue. You know, we talk about environmental goods at a very high level, you know, the complexity of classification and all of this. But one environmental good is basically a cleaner cook stove, you know. And there are trade policies that affect this. For some countries, there's research that's been done by the Clean Cooking Alliance. That shows that some countries still have tariffs up to 40% and above on the importation of a cleaner cook stove. You can have a debate as to what is clean and what's not clean, but certainly still cleaner than wood and charcoal. Okay, so, and what a challenge there. Some of the challenge is not because governments are unaware, it's mainly because again, a very trade consideration, revenue is obtained from tariffs, for instance. Okay, and there again, I think it's part of what I think is the agenda we need to move into, the more sort of implementation agenda, the more capacity agenda, making more policy coherence and things of that type. So let me stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Extremely interesting debate. I wish we had more time, and I liked that it was a little bit of crossfire, which was
No,
good.
no.
Friendly,
Not crossfire.
friendly.
Just ask the expert.
I am aware of the time. I think Ahok, you have partially replied to the last question, so I'll leave the last question to Sin Young, which is from her perspective. How can institutions like the Asian Development Bank, as Ahok had mentioned, and WTO leverage that partnership and alliances to advance the green trade and support developing countries in that transition to a low carbon economy? If you can keep it to 2 or 3 minutes, that way we will be able to go to the audience. Thanks.
Okay, sorry. So ADB has been a trusted development partner in the region. We work together with our developing member economies and try to address many of these issues through our financing, the tools, as well as our policy and then the technical capacity building advice. Especially, I kind of wanted to, bring your attention to our activities on trade finance and trade facilitation. In fact, as Deborah already mentioned, that a lot of SMEs who export are facing the biggest challenge in trade through access to finance. Actually, this usually come up as the top barrier to trade. we recently launched our the trade finance gap survey. We do this every 2 years, and then this year the report actually found that the trade finance gap reached $2.5 trillion in 2022. That is quite significantly higher compared to $1.7 trillion just 2 years ago in 2020. The largest trade finance the program that the ADB does, in fact, it goes to SMEs. 60% of trade finance the ADB have accumulated since 2009 are aimed at SMEs. What we also find in the survey, this is a very intuitive actually. The SMEs are accounting about like a 40% of trade finance applications. But compared to the larger number in the medium and the large enterprises. But SMEs are also 40% of SMEs, the application will be rejected compared to about 30% of applications done by the larger economies. The SMEs and then often like women-owned enterprises face greater difficulty accessing trade finance. But this might be even underestimation because many of the small micro firms as well as the women-owned enterprises will not even apply for SMEs. So we use this tool to promote the ESG guidelines. We actually now have a lot of pilot cases on tracing the carbon footprint through the supply chain. There are many opportunities and then great potential to leverage financing, the trade finance, to guide the SMEs to comply better and then adopt more environmentally friendly business practices. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for those points. Sin-Yang made it very clear. We have a lot of opportunities to engage with your respective countries, and we look forward to doing so. And to the extent that we can collaborate further with WTO, that would be great. We have 5 minutes left, unfortunately. Very sorry. We'll squeeze the period for question in it, from the audience. I think we can take a couple of quick questions and then we'll try to wrap up. Yes, please. If you can introduce yourself first. Thanks.
Thank you for a very interesting discussion. Yuri Uno from Toyota Motor North America. At Toyota, we believe in reducing CO2 emission as soon as possible, as fast as possible. To do that, we offer a portfolio approach so the consumers can choose hybrid to plug-in to EVs, right? Why? Because first of all, we don't have enough infrastructures, but the biggest problem is we don't have enough critical minerals where we have to import most of the times, right? And the process to extract and process the mineral is different. Some countries do it cleaner than the others, but there's no distinguishing. The tariff on all these are the same. So if you do cleaner way, it's more expensive, but then there's no benefits on tariff. Part of the reason why we're big on the hybrid is because for the same amount of minerals you need to produce one EV, we can make 90 hybrid, 90, okay? And we don't have enough minerals, not enough clean minerals, right? So what do you see is your role to help us get safer, cleaner minerals so we can continue to be cleaner comprehensively?
It's a great question. Maybe we'll take one more. If there's any burning questions before we answer. Anyone? Your opportunity? No? Okay. All right. So we've got a question on a very important topic.
I will attempt that.
Great. On critical minerals. We've heard a lot over the last few days and clean minerals for their production. Very, very clear question that you've raised. So who wants to take a chance? Ambassador?
I want to respond it to from my point of view as a trade negotiator, which is, I think this is one issue that Deborah raised, and maybe not about extracting the mineral. What I want to raise is that is a WTO principle of PPM, production processes method. which is a key to environmental measures. I'm not sure you are aware that in the WTO, if the final products are not so different, you have to levy the same tariff rate. You cannot distinguish between environmental friendly product and non-environmental product. So if it's the same tuna or the same shrimp, you don't, but this one is coming from no dolphin, that kind of stuff. But the same tariff rate will have still to be applied because of the principle of the like product. This has always been the WTO basic principle, and I'm not sure whether in the next phase of I don't want to say negotiation, but when we think about trading rules, being supportive or not supportive of trade measures, how can we do this? The same as Deborah said, can we distinguish between eco-friendly sandals and not eco-friendly sandals? If you can distinguish this, many producers will be more incentivized to do more environmental friendly products. But at the same time, I know people are gonna hate me for this, but this is the rules that people don't want to change because it will create very confusion. The custom people will not like it. They don't know this is better or not better. How are we going to overcome this? This will be one of the issues that the next negotiation or discussion on environment have to take into account. Yeah, that's my view. Yeah. But there's existing measures, but it's unilateral or private, which is eco-labeling. This is used to distinguish that. But as trading rules, there is no such thing yet. So.
Very, very good answer. Thank you very much. Anyone like that? Yes, thank you.
No, I think that the ambassadors made a good point. I just wanted to add that, just so that you're aware, those of you who don't follow necessarily WTO so closely, we also have a general exceptions through Article 20 of the GATT, where, it's clear that, from jurisprudence, members or governments can take environmental policy objectives. They can do so at whichever level they wish. They can also decide on which measure they want to take and how they would take it forward. And in essence, it's complex, but at the end of the day, if you do as a government, you do want to make this sorts of differentiations, and they already do, some of them already do so. There is a so-called legal recourse to Article 20. But you would have to show that what you're doing is really meeting that particular objective that you are seeking to obtain, and that it is non-discriminatory, is not arbitrary, and there's an objective standard. And it gets very much into the evidence and evidence base for the measure you're taking, which comes directly to I think, to your point that, beyond legal principles, it's about the ability to show and demonstrate the traceability of the mineral, for instance. And then the other complex part is the standard. Which standard are you adhering to? These two things, traceability and standards, they don't actually currently have a home in the WTO, and that's not just for critical minerals. And I have to there's not much time, but I have to try to explain what I mean by that, is that WTO is not a standards maker, so we don't make the standard, but we do tell standard makers that if you do make standards, you need to adhere to certain trade principles and trade rules, and that's how the WTO comes in. So we can try to incentivize standard makers to go in that direction, provided they create international standards that are really non-discriminatory, really objective, and they're science-based and so forth. But we can't make the standard itself. And this traceability, again, is another one of these challenges that we hear all the time. We see it being very important, and certainly coming more and more to the fore as to how do you do due diligence in your supply chain. But again, this system was not set up with the competence to do it. But can we still have positive action here? I think we can. We can do a lot of convening. We can bring people together. And one example is not critical minerals. We just had a session on decarbonizing steel and carbon standards. It's in that line of work that I think WTO could be very helpful to bring the parties together, and for you to then bring up some of the challenges that you're talking about. You know? So that's a perspective anyway. Thank you.
Yes, please, Deborah.
Just very quick, I was going to say one crucial thing which should run through everything that we do is that we need companies to come back to the WTO and talk about what your real world challenge is. And that's especially true, I think, at the trade and climate space, where you're dealing with issues that the institution wasn't really set up to deal with necessarily and is struggling with. They need to hear what are your actual problems, and then what are your solutions to those issues, and then you have some ideas you can put on the table. So I think the business community, which hasn't been terribly engaged with the WTO for a long time, big companies and small, need to be back in that engagement. Otherwise, it's impossible to figure out what the rules are that would make sense, and what are rules that would really genuinely not make sense and actually make your life worse and make the environmental outcomes potentially worse.
Very good. So thank you very much to all the speakers. We've reached time. I've gone a little bit over. I'm glad to see that there are a lot of keen participants in the audience. I'm not in any way pretending to make any concluding remarks. I will only leave you with 3 thoughts, and that is the dugong, the bamboo slippers, and the clean cooking stoves.
Yeah.
You will be able then to remember what this discussion is all about. So on that note, please join me in thanking these terrific panelists very much.
If I make a